The vibes continue to get lower surrounding the Philadelphia 76ers, and they are now off back-to-back losses at the hands of the Memphis Grizzlies and Brooklyn Nets, and also received some pessimistic injury updates. In this video, I'm going to break down everything, as well as a shining two-way guard who has stood out in his recent opportunity. So let's dive right into it. I'm going to begin with the unfortunate injury update. These coming before the game against the Memphis Grizzlies last night. Do want to talk a little bit specifically about that game as well, but I do want to start off with these injury updates here, which was released by Nick Nurse. Number one, with Robert Covington, a little bit of positive news here that Covington, who's dealing with a left knee bone bruise, is progressing in his rehabilitation progress and with the goal of beginning on-court activities over the next 7 to 10 days. He remains out when you reevaluate in approximately 1 week. So that is great news surrounding Robert Covington. We have not seen him step on the floor wearing a Sixers uniform since December 30th, so it's been quite some time. This has also been a situation which the Sixers have been pretty vague on what the circumstances are with Covington. He's just been shut out and away from the team for quite some time. Still been traveling on the bench, all those things. But we have not seen him do any sort of basketball activities for several months now. Now, if Covington does return to the floor, I do believe that can be an impactful player. That is a guy that can be one of their premier options as far as perimeter defense. He is a capable three-point shooter and a guy who's played some of his best basketball wearing a Sixers uniform before. So that would be something that changes the outlook team to some extent if he does return. But on the pessimistic side of things, we did get some worse news about D'Anthony Melton. And this saying that D'Anthony Melton is dealing with a lumbar spine bone stress. He has begun an offloading period and will be reevaluated in approximately 2 weeks. Now, that offloading period basically meaning he's just resting, that he's staying away from the team, not doing any sort of activities. And what concerns me most is when I gave this little Google search what the injury was and what he's dealing with, is there is a connection to some of the nerves in his back, which can work all over the body, going to the head, going down everywhere. So that type of situation is a little scary. This is something that they have to take seriously, and back injuries are unfortunately something that have plagued D'Anthony Melton for quite some time. Talking about even before he even came to the Sixers, that with the Grizzlies he was dealing with some back injuries. And then throughout his tenure with the Sixers, these past 2 seasons specifically, he's really dealt with some severe back injuries. To take a little bit of a look at the Fox injury report for Melton throughout his career, you can see them popping it up. That obviously 3 straight back injuries for what he's been dealing with lately. Then you dig a little down, back in November of 2022. Obviously, these could be different injuries, that they're not all indicative of the same thing he's dealing with, but back injuries tend to linger. And when there is that type of repetition that is occurring, it's not a great sign, not just in the short term for him returning to the floor, but really his overall career. That I'm starting to have some genuine concerns for, is this something that is going to linger in D'Anthony Melton? Now, obviously, I don't think he's quite built like Ben Simmons, but we are looking at a somewhat similar situation, and Ben Simmons being the guy that's played just 57 total games over the past 3 seasons. Now, whether that is truly a back injury, maybe something having to do with his mental makeup or the mental side of things that he's dealing with, obviously slightly different. But the bottom line is, this is not a unique situation in which back injuries can change a player's career and really shut them down. And I really hope D'Anthony Melton is not heading down that path. That is a guy who's been very useful and very effective during his time with the Sixers. He's a guy that I was ready to sign up and say, I want this guy to be a long-term member of the Sixers. I think he's an ideal complement to Tyrese Maxiell in the backcourt. He's turned himself into a really good three-point shooter with a really quick trigger on his release, something that he's gradually gotten better at since his time in the NBA and really with the Sixers. So sending prayers for D'Anthony Melton. I'm not overly optimistic of how soon he will step back to the floor. As the initial report mentioned, that D'Anthony Melton will be reevaluated within 2 weeks. But there's really no sign of what the outlook for when his actual return may be, and that is concerning to me. I know this is a little bit of the norm for the Sixers, that they keep things close to the vest, but when there's situations like this, I do think if there was more information and more of an indication, it would be helpful for them to provide it. So whether this is keeping it close or whether this is something of them being more pessimistic than they're truly showing, not a great sign overall. Now, the last guy that I want to touch on, we've yet to receive a Joel Embiid update. We did get some news on Tyrese Maxiell. So Nurse's quote on Maxiell specifically here, I will pull up this also coming pregame. He says, quote, "He's doing okay. I think he's still experiencing some very mild symptoms, right? And starting to try and get him started in the process of clearance. So hopefully that will go good. Hopefully the symptoms will go away and clear up completely and get trucking on that." Yeah. So that was Nurse's quote on that. Basically, at this time, we're still waiting on Maxiell to be fully himself before he can begin this return to play process, that he is still battling this concussion symptoms. Concussions are weird, man, that they impact every single person a little bit different. I know most of you, myself included, have experienced it before, and there are some real horror stories, and there's also situations in which guys are over it and bounce back immediately. So hopefully Maxiell is closer to the latter. Still a little strange in how that whole process went down, with him ultimately returning to the floor, having delayed symptoms the next day. Again, that is something that does happen, that it impacts everyone a little bit differently. But just prayers up that this is a speedy and effective recovery and he's able to step on the floor in the short term. I will say I'm a little more optimistic based on what has been reported about Maxi's return and how soon that could be, particularly compared to D'Anthony Melton. Now, a player that has taken the most of the opportunity, that has stepped up in the absence, it is two-way guard Jeff Dowtin Jr., and I've been really impressed with what he's brought to the team. To pull up his impact in last night against the Memphis Grizzlies, that in his 24 minutes of play off the bench, shooting 4 of 7 from the field, 2 of 4 from 3, added 10 points, 6 assists, and 3 rebounds, looked really impressive to me. And as you can see, there was a need for his help. That with the guard play, Cam Payne and Buddy Hield combining for just 12 of 34 from the field, not quite good enough, not getting a strong playmaking burst from either, 4 assists from Payne, 3 from Buddy. And then beyond that no Tyrese Maxiell, of course, no Kyle Lowry on the back-to-back. They needed someone to step up, and Jeff Dowtin was the guy to answer that call. And I've been a little bit pessimistic about Jeff Dowtin Jr., that personally I'll say I am higher on the long run for still both Terquavion Smith and Ricky Council IV, but this is more of a short-term fix. Jeff Dowtin's 26 years old. This isn't a guy in the early developments of his career arc. To some extent, he is who he is at this point. But who he is might just be a player necessary to what the Sixers need right now. What stood out to me the most in his game last night was just his overall decision-making. He felt like an adult on the floor. He felt like a true veteran, a guy that was capable of knowing when he needs to dribble it himself, when he needs to defer, when he needs to be the guy calling plays, running sets, when is it best for him to take a back seat. He's a guy that led the G League in assist-to-turnover ratio this year prior to being elevated to this two-way contract and joining the team, and clearly a guy that Nick Nurse trusts, and that is a big deal. That one of the warning signs that we kind of received from Raptors fans when Nick Nurse officially agreed to be the coach of the Sixers is that Nick Nurse does get his guys, which he likes and dislikes. I think it's very clear that Jeff Dowtin is one of his guys. This starting because the Sixers traded for Jeff Dowtin at the G League level. They actually traded Mac McClung away to come get him and bring him to the G League. That ultimately, we got to see that Jeff Dowtin had his experience with the Toronto Raptors. And to pull up his full stats here, not a ton at the NBA level, played just 25 games for the Toronto Raptors last year, but that's by far the greatest NBA opportunity that he had received. And then coming back to this year at his age 26 season, that already 2 games in the books, 15 minutes per game. I believe last night was the longest stint in the NBA level that he has received, and that it is clear this is evidence of what Nick Nurse believes in him, that he immediately hopped the line, subbing in the first quarter before Ricky Council IV got a chance, Terquavion Smith not stepping on the floor. That is a strong sign. And Nurse spoke a little bit about it after the game, that I did want to pull up this quote here from Nurse. Nick Nurse was plenty familiar with Dowtin, who appeared in 25 games for the Toronto Raptors last season. He said Dowtin, quote, did an excellent job on both ends of the floor and was deserving of more second-half minutes in Philly's loss to the Grizzlies. Quote, he's a good player, Nurse said. He really knows how to play the game. He's got a good feel for running an offense. He's kind of an orchestrator, but he will step in and shoot if you leave him, and he'll get a bucket here and there. And he's a really good defender. He's a good on-ball defender. So that is a pretty glowing praise there. And that quote coming from Sam DiGiovanni of Clutch Points there. I love what I saw from Jeff Dowtin last night. It is that decision-making, and really that's what stood out a ton from what Kyle Lowry's brought to the team, is there's a calming presence when you have guys who are just capable with the ball in their hands, who are adequate basketball players and know when to turn it on. When is the time to play make for others? When is the time to go get your own bucket? That's something that Jeff Dowtin seems to have a strong control on, and especially during the shorthanded stretch, they need more ball handlers. That I know we've all been pounding the table, hoping for some big man help, and by the way, Mo Bamba looks like he's completely fallen out of favor, that even in a night like last night where Paul Reed fouls out, where they're short on really front court options, they're rolling with KJ Martin and Tobias Harris as the center for stretches over Mo Bamba. So I do think that's telling there. But even with us pounding the table and hoping for big men, you look around and there's not a lot of options for actually running the offense and bringing the ball up the floor. And I get the frustrations with no Kyle Lowry there, but this is a guy who logged 36 minutes the night before, and I don't think the plan is for him to be that level of player, that he's going to be a rotational guard, a backup point guard, a guy who's more of a mentor for Tyrese Maxiell than was brought in to be that much of an impact player. Sure, he's going to play, but he's going to play come playoff time. That's when the push and win Kyle Lowry is important to this team. And I am overall just very frustrated over the loss last night. That I get it, they're shorthanded, there's not a lot here, but in a game in which they led by 15, they were outscored 34-16 in the fourth quarter. When you look at the box score, it's not hard to find where to point the fingers. That Tobias Harris, once again, 35 minutes, 8 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 of 12 from the field. And I get it. I don't want to pile on the guy, and I know I kind of already am. But the decision-making last night, the worst I've ever seen in a Sixers uniform from him. Some of those moments in transition, just telegraphing whether he was kicking to the corner, whether he was taking it himself, whether he was looking for a dump-off, and it just never worked in the way it was. I will give one shout-out to Kelly Oubre Jr. for continuing to step up in his 34 minutes of play, scoring 25 points, 4 rebounds, just 7 of 21 from the field, but frankly, they needed someone to step up and take that level of shots. Paul Reed also providing some excellent minutes with 17 points and 11 rebounds. Unfortunate that he did foul out there, but that is the Paul Reed experience. Buddy Hield with 15 of his own, including a big-time 3 at the end, which gave the Sixers at least a fighting chance, but they were ultimately unable to secure the win. 16 for Cam Payne, 10 for Nico Batum, and then 10 for Jeff Dowtin Jr. as the next leading scorer there. Now, for this Sixers team, those are 2 really bad losses. Those are 2 that I've spoken pretty confidently about their ability to stay afloat, stay in this playoff race. I think it's time to accept that this is a play-in team, that by dropping those next 2 with no real end in sight for when health will return to this roster, those were ones that they needed in the standings. They've now dropped to 7th place. It's still very tight in the race to the East, that the difference between 4th place and 8th place is not very much within the standings and the seedings. So there's still a lot to watch for things. But those were 2 games that they coughed away, that they had an opportunity to win each. And it's hard to be too frustrated because they simply were short so many bodies. But based on the game script and how things played out, the Sixers absolutely should have come out on top, and it's very frustrating that they didn't. But we will see what happens with here. They'll be back in action tomorrow against the New Orleans Pelicans. Kyle Lowry expected to return the floor, but that's really it from an injury update standpoint. They need to find a way to get some in the win column. I'm not overly optimistic tomorrow. I think Zion Williamson is absolutely going to eat against the lack of front court ability that these Sixers currently have, but we'll see what overall happens. But I do want to hear from you guys. What's your kind of outlook for Jeff Dowtin Jr.? Are you starting to buy? Are you starting to believe? Are you on the Nick Nurse side of things? And what's your overall level of pessimism for some of these injuries? Appreciate all you guys for tuning in. Make sure you're smashing that subscribe button right here on Sixers Digest, dropping a like on the channel, and commenting your thoughts on both of those questions. And I'll be back with you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.